This winter is shaping up to be one of the wildest we've seen in years, and I don't say that lightly. The signals I'm seeing in the atmosphere right now are screaming volatility. With El Niño quickly fading, we're about to enter this chaotic transition where the atmosphere reshuffles the deck. That's when things get dangerous, when polar vortex disruptions become possible, when brutal Arctic air blasts southward, when we start talking about crippling snowstorms, and even severe weather outbreaks in the dead of winter. Now, I know, the last few winters have been fairly tame for a lot of the country. Sure, we've had a few cold snaps and storms, but nothing historic. This winter feels different. The potential is there for something much more intense, much more memorable. And to understand why, we've got to look at what's happening thousands of miles away, out in the Pacific Ocean. See, the Pacific is where the story of every winter really begins. The ocean sets the stage and the atmosphere follows the script. What I'm talking about is something called ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation. It's basically the single biggest driver of winter weather in the United States. ENSO has 3 phases, and each one comes with its own flavor of winter. When we've got an El Niño, that's when the Pacific waters run hotter than normal. The southern jet stream gets supercharged and dips across the southern U.S. That usually means a wetter south. Stormier coasts, flood threats in places like California and along the Gulf, while the northern tier actually ends up warmer and drier. It's the kind of setup that locks away Arctic air from hitting the Midwest and Northeast as often. But flip the script. When we slide into La Niña, those waters turn cooler than normal. The jet stream shifts north, the northern states get hammered with snow and cold, and the south ends up warmer and drier. That's when you start seeing those brutal Arctic outbreaks spilling into Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, even all the way to New York and Boston. La Niña winters can be downright nasty if you live in the northern half of the country, and then there's that in-between stage, neutral conditions. That's when the Pacific is neither hot nor cold, and the atmosphere doesn't get a strong push one way or the other. And here's the kicker. Neutral winters can be some of the most unpredictable and chaotic, because other climate drivers step in and start calling the shots. You don't get consistency and you get swings. Warm one week, bitter cold the next, followed by a monster storm out of nowhere. And that is exactly where we're heading this winter. We're not looking at a strong El Niño. We're not looking at a powerhouse La Niña. What we've got is a neutral Pacific with just the slightest lean toward La Niña. That's why I'm telling you right now. Buckle up. These are the winters that flip on a dime and keep meteorologists and everyone else to being on edge. The last time we had a setup like this? Go back to 2013-2014, and if you lived through that winter, you remember. The polar vortex became a household name. Arctic air kept plunging south week after week. The Midwest and Northeast got hammered with snow and ice storms. Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, they were buried. And it wasn't just the cold. The East Coast storm track was alive that year, churning out nor'easters that shut down cities. Meanwhile, California and much of the West were bone dry, locked in a drought that would linger for years. Now, I'm not saying this winter will be a carbon copy of 2013. Weather never repeats exactly, but the similarities are impossible to ignore. Even this year's hurricane season looks suppressed, just like it was in 2013, with hostile winds cutting storms apart before they can reach the coast. It's eerie how many parallels line up. So here's what I'm thinking for 2025. The Northern Plains, the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, these regions are in the bullseye for repeated Arctic blasts. I see well below average temperatures setting up, especially across the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and stretching into Ohio and Pennsylvania. And yes, that means more snow, more ice, and a much rougher winter than what most of us have gotten used to. On the flip side, Florida, southern Texas, and the West Coast, you're probably going to be basking in warmth more often than not. Above average temperatures look likely there, but don't let that fool you. A neutral winter can still throw a curveball. Even the warm zones can get hit with an icy surprise if the pattern lines up just right. Now let's talk storms. Unlike 2013, when much of the country was cold but dry, I'm actually expecting a wetter pattern this time around for the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and the Northeast. That means more snowstorms, more opportunities for ice, and bigger systems tracking through during December, January, and February. If you live in these regions, get ready. This could be the kind of winter where we're talking about multiple headline-making storms. And it's not just snow. Neutral winters, especially when leaning toward La Niña, also raise the risk for severe weather outbreaks. People forget, late fall and early winter have what we call the second severe weather season. When you've got Gulf moisture meeting an active jet stream, tornadoes can fire, even in November and December. Look back at November 17, 2013, 73 tornadoes in one day, some of them violent, ripping across the Midwest and the South. With the setup we're staring at, something like that cannot be ruled out. All right, let me take you straight into what's happening right now, because we've got a huge development with Tropical Storm Alda. This storm is sitting just off the east coast of Florida, and over the next couple of days, it's expected to strengthen into a hurricane. But here's the real headline. The track of this storm has done a complete flip over the past 48 hours. What looked like one kind of threat is now shaping into something very different. And trust me, when I show you the latest model runs, you'll see exactly why forecasters have been scrambling to adjust. But Alda isn't the only player in the Atlantic tonight. We've actually got two storms dancing dangerously close to one another. To the east, Hurricane Alberto is raging as a powerful Category 4 system, churning just south of Bermuda. And then sitting uncomfortably close to it, right over the Bahamas, is Alda, a middle-grade tropical storm that's been steadily feeding off warm waters and gaining strength. The proximity of these two storms has completely rewritten the forecast, and what we're seeing unfold is rare, dramatic, and fascinating all at once. The real game changer here, though, is what meteorologists call the Fujiwara effect. Picture two powerful low-pressure systems swirling close together, like two dancers pulling each other around. Alberto, being the much stronger storm, is taking the lead in this dance, and as it races north, it's actually yanking Alda eastward, away from the U.S. coastline. That's why the models, which just a couple of days ago were hinting at heavy rain and direct impacts along the east coast, have now swung dramatically. Almost every forecast track shows Alda bending sharply east Tuesday night into Wednesday, sparing the U.S. from what could have been a serious situation. Let me just emphasize how dramatic this shift really is. 2 days ago, we were talking about double-digit rainfall totals, 15, maybe even 20 inches of rain, slamming parts of the Carolinas. Now, most spots won't even crack an inch. Florida, right along the east coast, looks to pick up 1 to 3 inches, and outside of that, it's mostly just some scattered showers and minor flooding. It's wild how quickly the story changed. And honestly, the only thing Floridians and beachgoers up the coast need to be seriously prepared for are dangerous rip currents and high surf. We're talking 10 to 15-foot waves crashing in, along with life-threatening currents stretching from Florida all the way up toward the mid-Atlantic. Now, that covers the tropics, but we've also got something else brewing here in the U.S. that you need to know about. A massive heat wave is building, and by Thursday and Friday, it's going to be spreading across the plains and Midwest. Temperatures are set to climb 10 to 20 degrees above normal. We're talking highs in the upper 80s and 90s, stretching from the northern plains down to Texas. At the same time, a backdoor cold front will be sneaking down the east coast, cooling things off for New England and the Northeast. So while folks in Boston or New York might get a taste of crisp, fall-like air, much of the rest of the country is going to be sweltering. And here's where it gets interesting. Once we push into the first full week of October, the pattern gets active again. We could see multiple storm systems firing off across the plains and Midwest, maybe even bringing our first true round of severe weather for fall. This is what meteorologists call our second severe weather season. It's not as frequent as spring, but it can still pack a serious punch. Tornadoes, hail, damaging winds. And for some of you up north, maybe even that first brush with snowfall. So here's the bottom line. Alda's story has shifted dramatically, thanks to its close encounter with powerhouse Hurricane Alberto. U.S. impacts are now expected to be limited, but rip currents and high surf remain a major danger all along the East Coast. Bermuda should brace for possible hurricane conditions midweek. Meanwhile, a heat wave is about to grip much of the country, and as we flip into October, the atmosphere looks primed to stay active with more storm systems on the horizon. And as always, if anything changes with Alda, Alberto, or the broader forecast, I'll be right here breaking it down for you. So make sure you're subscribed, keep your alerts on, and stay weather aware.